Welcome once again to In the Trenches with Dave Lapham, brought to you by First Star Logistics. And I hope you enjoyed part one of our conversation with Joe Goodberry. And we talked about a lot of things. Talked a lot about salary cap, free agency, the draft. It's that time of year, and there's more coming your way here in part two. It's interesting, the last two off seasons prior to this one, the Bengals attacked free agency on the defensive side of the football and then hit the offense in the draft, and it's kind of like a little bit of a flip-flop. This off season, you get three veteran offensive linemen, you get a tight end, you've attacked your offense. Do you think the Bengals will probably lean toward the defensive side of things, particularly early in the draft? And I'm not saying for the entire draft. You're not going to go defense every single pick. They have 8 picks, 2 7th-rounders. But do you think with the 31st pick in the draft, they're leaning defense, or do you think it's best player available?
I think you always have an eye on best player available. Right. You can never discount that. It's how you end up with a William Jackson in 2017 is when you're sitting there and you're like, oh, the receivers aren't there. And we got this guy as a top 12 graded guy and he's still on the board. Let's take him. And generally that works out for your franchise. So I think they're always have one eye on BPA. But I do think it's defense. And I do, because we started talking about the cap, and I think the cap is the best way to indicate where teams are going to go in the draft. And when you look at the Bengals, they are spending much more on the defensive side. They can't afford to sign a guy like, fans will ask you, any interest in Stephon Gilmore? They cannot afford to sign a Stephon Gilmore at corner. It's not that they don't have the cap space. It's that you're already paying 5 veteran contracts in the defensive backfield. If you're going to add talent, which I still think they need to do, you're going to do it through the draft. You're going to get cheap labor through the draft, whether that's a 1st or 2nd round pick, maybe even 3rd at corner, and that guy sits and develops and plays, with Eli Apple at that other boundary spot. So I think seeing that makes a lot of sense. They're paying their entire defensive line now that B.J. Hill got the big deal. If you want cheap labor, you want to add more talent to that unit, which I do think they need. It would come in the form of a draft pick, 2nd, 3rd round, maybe even 1st round if the right guy's there. So I do think that's the way to go. The underrated one is how the Bengals sometimes look a year in advance. Does that mean safety is somewhere there? They look at it and say, well, there's a guy on the board at 31, or is it 2nd, 3rd round? When they drafted Jesse Bates, it was with an eye with a year in advance, an eye on that. And he ended up winning the job in camp and beating out George Iloka, who they released that summer. So I do think they could look at that, and all signs point to the defense being heavy early. They've had some interest, though, in tight ends. They're just, it seems like they keep getting connected to Trey McBride. So, I mean, is that a guy in the 2nd round? Is it a Jelani Woods in the 2nd or 3rd round? Do they knock or tap in the tight end a little bit earlier than I think some expect? Because you want to draft the tight end probably 2 years before you actually need him, right? So you're kind of looking at it like, give the guy time to bulk up, get stronger, get in line, because they're not really in line anymore in college, blocking right there at the Y. And that's kind of how the Bengals would like to do it, and especially if they want to stick with the run game the way they do. So I think that if they're going to go offense early, I'd actually put tight end before offensive line.
Yeah, I would too. I agree with you. And I'm not sure that there's a guy at 31, like you say, that, unless a real one of the major prospects slides and does a big-time slide. Let's talk about potential guys, and I know this is all soothsayer. Nobody knows. Everybody's guess is as good as the next. But if you see most mock drafts, there's usually half a dozen to 8 cornerbacks going before the Bengals pick at 31. That's a decent run. The Bengals are hoping that there's only half a dozen. And stay away from 7, 8, or 9 guys off the board. Who do you have in that range in your early analysis? And I know it's early, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I know you're a guy that wants to see it on tape before you make declarations. And I totally respect that. I'm right in line with your thinking there. But is there anybody that, or 2 or 3 guys that, boy, obviously Sauce Gardner's not going to be there,
right?
But who might be there?
Yeah, and Derek Stingley either from LSU. Right. If they can keep that LSU connection running, they'd love that. But it's not going to happen, right? You got to kind of have to eliminate a few of these guys right off the top. And especially with the teams, I think that are picking right in front of them with the Chiefs and Bills and things like that. I think both those teams are looking at corner. Could be a similar situation we just brought up about wide receiver in 2017 where, the corners just aren't there. I think the interesting one and why he could be there is Andrew Booth from Clemson. We're talking about a long-rangey guy that made a lot of plays on the ball, but he's not going to test. He's currently, I think, a sports hernia surgery. That's not anything major. But anytime a guy doesn't test before you draft him, it does create a little bit of risk in that profile. And I think that's a reason why he could still be there at a 31. Bengals may see that as a value, right? They've done that before. They saw Cedric Boy, he didn't get to test as a value pick, figuring he would have went much higher had he been healthy and tested. Not that it has to work out negatively. I don't mean to bring up that example as such, but I think you can get Elam out of Florida too. I don't know if you've watched him at all, but he's also a feisty guy that's going to fight. And I think when I watch corners, and I plan on really digging in the corner over the next few weeks, the few things I look for are natural ball skills. Are these guys comfortable with their backs to the ball? Can they find it, locate it, high point it? Can they get their hands on it? Or are they panicky? Are they grabby in those situations? And what is their competitive drive at? Are they competing through every play, even with the ball's a quick throw or it's going to the other side or it's a run play? If a guy's coming up to block you, are you just standing there holding the hands playing patty cake, or are you trying to fight through them and trying to make a play on the ball even when it's really not coming your way? And I think Elam looks like that kind of guy who's going to keep his competitive drive firing throughout, and he's got good ball skills. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was a guy they've got high on their board as well. And then I think you look at defensive tackles, and it's a weird class at defensive tackle, and especially for 31, because I think there's a few guys like Jordan Davis out of Georgia and Devonte Wyatt out of Georgia, and these guys are guys that, because that defense was so deep, we're talking about they played 250 snaps, and is that enough? And then you see them at the combine, and they blow up the combine, but the production scores aren't going to be very high. I think Devonte Wyatt had 2.5 sacks this year, 1.5 being against Chattanooga or Charleston. I can't remember which CH team it was now, but when I watched them, I'm like, okay, so you're beating up on some future lawyers. That's great. But, but as of now, you look at those guys and you say, okay, do they go too high for the Bengals? I think Davis probably does. I think teams get enamored with that, guys that just blow up the combine the way they do. And does that mean you got a guy like a Travis Jones out of UConn there who's more of like a 5-tech I talked about, because he's 6'4" and some change, plays a little high. I think anytime you got a D tackle, it's over 6'3", I start worrying about pad level. And, can these guys lose their power? Does that power get sapped because your leverage is poor? Typically, for me, I like those guys that are 6'2" and 300 and pack the power and explosive first steps. And I think you got a few of those guys this year, like Logan Hall, DeMarvin Leal. And are those guys going to be in the first range, or are they more of a round 2? So it's kind of hard when I start ranking these guys already at defensive tackle. I think the few that I like are going to go in top 20. Right. And then the few that either are tweeners between like a 5-tech, 3-tech type, some guys that even played more over tackle or outside tackle in college, and they're going to probably have to kick inside a little bit more in the NFL because they're 285 plus. Look, they have the frame to add a little bit, like a Perion Winfrey from Oklahoma. Are those guys worthy of the 31st pick? It's kind of a strange thing. We're not used to picking this late. We're not used to projecting this late in the draft. It's more of like looking at second-round prospects and hoping a guy falls to that spot that you still have a first-round grade on. And I feel like the second group of defensive tackles, I'm more of I feel better about them in round 2.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the pad level. I mean, is a guy a knee bender, or is he bend at the waist? You got to be a knee bender, man. You can't be bending at the waist to get that pad level low. I totally agree with that, because otherwise you're gonna lose power like you're talking about. And I really like how loose are a cornerback's hips. Can he flip his hips and run with people in so doing? And can he sink his hips and get in and out of cuts with receivers and all that sort of thing? Because you got a guy like Tariq Woolen, 6'4", 205 pounds, out of Texas San Antonio. Converted wide receiver, ran a 4.26, the second best at the combine. His arms are 33 5/8, over 33.5-inch length to his arms. I mean, he's tall, he's long, 42-inch vertical, best at the combine. But is he a football player? Because, I mean, is this, are you talking about a track meet, or are you talking about playing football? I mean, and it's, there's that in my mind is a big deal. This kid's got some raw numbers, but I don't know. I'm going to have to take a long, hard look at him before I'm convinced. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm excited to watch him as well because I like guys that test well. So, it shouldn't be a negative. If you look at some of the best players in the league, they're probably great athletes, right? We look at it, as a whole, everyone's a good athlete, but the best of the best are typically elite athletes. And so when you see those guys, that's why they pop up and that's why everyone gets excited. Because you want to go to the tape. Is this guy, what he's testing as? Can you see the projection there? And when he doesn't have the production the way Woolen does, he doesn't get his hands on the ball. It doesn't make a lot of tackles. He's not that kind of. Is he a track guy? Is he a former wide receiver that doesn't want to do the physical parts that are required at corner that I've talked about earlier? And usually when they're track guys too, you do see the stiffness in their long gaits and the way they run. Right? You can kind of you see that a lot of times. So yeah, I'm excited to watch him as well. There's a lot of high-end athletes in this draft that I actually think that's a thing the Bengals could probably push for a little bit. It seems I track everything that they drafted since Duke Tobin's been there, basically, even though, he's to the point he is now, to the point he was, it's his role has only strengthened within the organization, but I still like to look at the data and see who they've drafted. And corner is one where they don't seem to care about arm length. We got a few guys here with some real short arms, but they do like speed and they do like the ball production in college. And at defensive tackle, they like guys that are athletes. And the same with tight end. That's like the two positions they're like, I want an athlete at tight end and defensive tackle. That's why I started with those groups, because I can pinpoint now, but looking at combine scores and their testing, the one that really doesn't matter to them lately is offensive line. They've drafted a lot of guys with shorter arms that didn't test like elite athletes. The Jonah Williams mold, even the Jackson Carman. Deontay Smith had the arms, didn't really have the weight at the time, and was a above average athlete, not an elite athlete. So you look at their recent draft trends, you can kind of pinpoint the guys they like and can kind of eliminate some of the guys based on production or athleticism.
Yeah, I guess final comment on Woolen. If you're a 6'4", 205-pound guy that runs a 4.26 and you were a wide receiver, could you not catch the football? Is that why you were moved from in the day? It was like, I mean, he doesn't have good enough ball skill to make him a corner. I mean, it's right. Like that's what happens a lot. So I mean, he may even struggle in that area. When like cornerbacks at Alabama, people not only evaluate them for their physical talents and how they play on tape, but you got Nick Saban, who that's his specialty. I mean, he's a defensive-oriented coach. His specialty is that cornerback position. That's where, he cut his teeth. And, it's like when Penn State, it was Penn State U for linebackers, USC for running backs for years and years and years. Washington's got a couple of corners in this year's draft. When a guy comes from a school like that has a history of turning out those kind of position players, is that a tiebreaker? I mean, is it like, oh, this guy, yeah, boy, watching him on tape, he's a good player. Plus the fact that the tiebreaker may be, boy, he was exposed to such good coaching. His technique is so sound. Do you think that ends up being a tiebreaker? Yeah,
I do think it does. The Bengals like to draft big school guys as it is. And I think like when you bring up the corners at Alabama, they're doing a lot of pattern match stuff, which I think, NFL teams want. And they want to know if guys can handle that mentally. Yep. And when they do, it does break a tie, or at least what it does for me is I will say it solidifies maybe your projection or your evaluation, makes it a little bit cleaner and easier. You know what the guy will look like in an NFL scheme. That's a good thing. You watch offensive linemen from Iowa or Nebraska or Stanford, and you get a pretty good feel about how that guy's going to look at the next level. It's the thing like with Tyler Linderbaum. He's got shorter arms and people freak out a little bit. Then you put the tape back on and you go, he's doing things that he's going to be asked to do in the NFL, and he's still really, really good, even with those short arms. It's not a problem for him. He's a people mover. Even you can see his wrestling background, right? So like these guys that have been developed in those programs that usually develop that position, it's usually a positive. And I think it starts from their own recruiting processes. They know what they like in that position. So they have identified it. They know how to find it. And usually if that guy succeeds in that system, probably because he's good at that position.
Yeah, and a guy like Linderbaum, and I mean, if it's true that his arms are shorter than 32 inches, I've seen like 31 and 7/8 or something like that. That is not a whole lot of length, but you watch him, man, his lateral movement, his quickness, his explosiveness, he's doing things that overcome that disadvantage. I mean, he's figured out a way to, okay, I may have short arms. I might not be able to finish with the length that some of the guys in the NFL, but I'm going to be quicker. I'm going to get there a half a step sooner or a step sooner, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
He's doing it at such a high level. It's not like, he went from high school, proved he could do it in high school, goes to Iowa, where like you say, they churn out offensive linemen, proves he can do it at Iowa. I mean, I guess betting on him isn't that big a long shot,
There are always red flags on these guys in some way. It doesn't have to eliminate them off your board. If a guy doesn't have the threshold of weight or arm length or whatever the case may be, you can say, okay, that's an issue on our profile. But what does he possess to overcome that? How did he overcome that? How does he win? How does he lose? And when you watch the tape, and I think when you watch Linderbaum, he's a great example of this. Yes, the arms are short. But I expect when he does test, he hasn't yet because of a foot injury, I believe. He's going to be an elite athlete because you see it, that explosiveness off the ball, that how quick he can reach block and get around those guys that are, shaded way out there at 3 and 4 tech, and he gets out in front of those guys and seals them off. I mean, that's rare ability just in movement. And then his strength and his hand placement, I think he displaces guys at the point of attack as well as any center I've ever watched. And I think when you see he's like 290 something pounds, that he's got some strength to him, and he's winning with technique and explosion with that power. And I think when you get to that point, the arm length doesn't matter because I think he's going to be a good player. He reminds me a lot of Jason Kelce. Yeah, I feel like the Eagles have done a great job with Kelce over his career. They don't let him go one-on-one with those 6'4", 34-inch arms defensive tackles. They're not going to do that. That'd be silly. They're going to give him some help. And I think you would have to do a little bit of that with Linderbaum, but the advantages you get outweigh that little bit of tweak you'd have to do to your system.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a technician, and they teach great technique at Iowa, and he has got his doctorate, in what they're teaching there. His hand placement, his feet. I mean, he's a hell of a player. This was great. I'm telling you, Joe, you've obviously started doing some serious homework. I know this must be about your favorite time of the year too, when you're talking free agency and draft.
For sure.
Gets the juices flowing, doesn't it? Who do you think, what team, in your opinion, did the best job in free agency?
I like what the Chargers did. I think when you can get a Khalil Mack and a J.C. Jackson, you're getting 2 premium defenders. I think getting pass rushers is the best way to neutralize the opponent quarterback. When you can, it's an arms race, right? Don't you feel it? I feel like every team feels what's happening in the AFC and how teams are loading up and really seeing the quarterbacks you're going to have to play against and the slate of quarterbacks, especially in that division. I feel like the Chargers did a great job of trying to neutralize the opponent quarterback. But, when a team like the Bengals made it to the Super Bowl and they had one glaring weakness, sometimes that is an advantage, if you will, because, you don't, we could use a guy here or there. No, you needed offensive linemen, and they went out and attacked it. So it's hard to say that, they didn't do exactly what they were supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, Joe Burrow rewrote a good portion of the record book with an offensive line that allowed him to be sacked 70 times in the regular season and postseason. Imagine the numbers he could have put up if they could have knocked those sacks down to 45, instead of 70. Man, who knows? All of a sudden now, offensive coordinator Brian, Coach Callahan and Coach Taylor are like, hey, we can run a lot deeper, crossers. We can do a lot different route combinations.
Backside stuff that they couldn't even get to.
Got a little time, no doubt. Joe, appreciate it. Thanks for carving time. I know it's a busy time of the year for you. Thanks for giving us some of it, and go get them, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. And nice talking to you, Dave.
Same here, Joe. Have a good day.
Take care.
At First Star Logistics, we're a very strict company that really puts the pressure on our employees. Breaks? What are those?
That's what I'm talking about, Icky. Get the body right, then the mind's right.
Gotta get that body right.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Become a star with a chance to earn the highest commission percentages in the industry as a freight broker agent. Check out FirstStarLogistics.com.